And this is something that I try and not look past. Oh, this was created, or it's because the dog didn't get enough of this or that. I believe that everything is genetic.
Overall, I agree with what you're saying. There's just some qualifying things that I mean, there's some question marks I have.
Sure.
For example,
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Standing Stone podcast. Today is a very special episode. It's something that's important to me, and I'm also really excited for the guests that we have, and we'll be introducing here in just a second. If this is your first time to the podcast, if you're listening, there's also, so you know, the visual version available on YouTube. Standing Stone Podcast is the YouTube channel, and this is going to be one that's going to be really beneficial for you to actually bop over to the YouTube channel to watch. We're going to be talking about pedigrees. That's going to involve a lot of different things. We'll be looking at specifically short hairs. That's what I breed, as well as our guest, and it's one of those things that the concepts, the ideas, the things that we'll be going over are applicable in all different breeds. But it is still, it's fun. This is kind of one of those nerd out episodes that I think that y'all enjoy. We did this a while back, and we got a lot of feedback. People were interested in, you know, kind of the thought process behind what we do and why we're doing things. Now, for those of you that do like to follow along with the stuff that we do, you probably know we have a Patreon account. It's set up for you to help support what we are doing, the time, effort, and energy put into videos and podcasts and other information like this. But also, it is a community designed for you to be able to get help and learn how to train your dog at home. If that's something that you're interested in, definitely hit us up. It's patreon.com/Standing Stone Kennels. We can even set up a step-by-step training program specifically for you and your dog that we do weekly or bi-weekly check-ins. So also, anything that we are talking about or that we do is available at standingstonesupply.com. It's our online dog training supply store. It's there. We've tried to be a one-stop shop for the folks that are interested in training dogs and learning themselves. But without further ado, what we're going to do here is jump into, I've got Fred Rice with us. I've known Fred for a long time, though we've actually never met in person. He has been a good sounding board, if you will. He's talked to me quite a few times about different things, and this is going to be one that he's got a lot of experience in. He's humble. He's going to act like he doesn't, but it's one of those things that I'd like to introduce Fred Rice. Thanks for being on the show here with us today.
Well, I appreciate being invited, Ethan, and I. I'll offer what I can, and let's qualify by saying this will be the first time I've done a podcast, so bear with me if I struggle a little bit at times. It's a little bit different having a conversation where you know you're being recorded, audio and video, versus just sitting across the table from someone. But I'm going to do my best to just roll with it. I'm going to be natural as much as I can be, and like I said, I'll share what I know. After this many years of doing this, you're bound to learn something. So I'll let you.
Hey, if you aren't learning, you aren't trying.
Exactly.
Now, Fred, you own Sundance Kennels?
Yes.
Yeah. So how long have you been in short hairs and breeding and in this game?
Okay. Well, like you and I talked a little bit prior to actually starting the podcast, a little bit of background on me, which I think is helpful. First of all, who am I? Well, I'm a 67-year-old guy that lives in central Missouri. Okay. So I think that's important for the context of the discussion. So you have a little bit of idea of how long I've been doing this. And I live in central Missouri. This part of the world is, paradise to me. It's home. But the culture here, let's go back to when I was a young person in let's say the 60s and 70s of the 1960s and 70s. Growing up, wild bird hunting was and I think this was true across a lot of North America. Wild bird hunting was, first of all, there was a lot of it to be had. The quality of wild bird hunting back in those days was still really good in a lot of areas, like in the Southeast, the Northeast, the Midwest, and particularly here in Missouri. That's part of life. I'm from a rural part of Missouri, farm people, hunting and fishing. That was a big deal. So I just want to throw that in. It's like, where did this start for me as a teenage boy? Going quail hunting with my grandfathers, my dad. Then as I got into my teens, quail hunting was like a passion for me, and it's kind of like it's something you everybody has that thing they kind of f- find that they're good at or that they really love and they want to be good at. So for me, it was wild bird hunting. I was just ate up with it. And so I'm just sharing with you that's where it started for me. It's like anytime I could go quail hunting, I wanted to go. And it was me and my next door neighbor. He was a good friend, same age as me. We had Brittany Spaniels back in those days. I'll say also. Um, I'd never seen a German Shorthair pointer. Um, the first time I saw a German Shorthair was probably in the 80s.
Hmm.
And then I started learning more about them. But anyway, the dogs we knew about were English pointers, setters, Brittany Spaniels. And then I got into, in my 20s, and I'd say in 1989 is the first short hair I purchased. There was a breeder here in Columbia, Missouri. Her name was Joan Anderson. Her husband's name was Richard Anderson. I'm pretty sure that's right. And their kennel name was Monarch. And they did a lot with the Hill Haven kennels, and they're sort of dual purpose dogs. They were doing show stuff and they were doing field stuff. They were also involved in NAVDA. So my first short hair was from a Monarch breeding. She was a granddaughter of dual champion Eric von Enstrom, national field champion, dual champion Eric von Enstrom. And on her bottom side, she was out of actually a hustler daughter. So a very nicely bred dog. And I'll just say this: we're talking rural Missouri here. You're going to get a mixed bag of what would I call it, quality of breedings, insight into what they're doing. You know what I'm saying? And versus, so here we have a breeding that's, when you look at it, go, wow, this there's titles in here. There. First of all, this is a line bred dog. The first dog I got, first short hair I got, and I fell in love with her. So I hope that gives you. I'll take a breath there, and maybe you can, if you have any questions to ask to add to what I just said, but that kind of gives you a little background on how I got to where I started with the German Shorthairs.
Well, that's perfect. So you've been in bird dogs most of your life, and been in short hairs since the early '80s, right? Does it sound like?
Well, the first German Shorthair I purchased was out of a breeding. She was whelped in 1989. Her name was Jenny, and actually so the so the Sundance name came from her sire was Michigan Sundance Bow.
Oh, I like it.
All right, Michigan Sundance Bow. He was a son of this national field champion, dual champion Eric von Enstrom, and so believe me, when I forgot the first short hair, I didn't see breeding dogs in my future. I was a wild bird hunter, and I hunted most of the time by myself. I would hunt during the quail season. I might hunt 3, 4 days a week. Now, that sounds like a lot, but it wasn't all day. I would
Sure.
take off in the afternoons and go bird hunting. So my passion was bird hunting, but then one thing led to another. First of all, this dog, she was really nice. And then I started hearing about NAVDA, so the North American Versatile Hunting Dog Association. And we could talk, there's too many different ways we could go here with this discussion, but let's just say what kind of led me into wanting to breed dogs was, first of all, getting my hands on a well-bred dog, uh, becoming acquainted with people who were doing things with NAVDA, and then there were a few people in the area who wanted to start a NAVDA chapter. And they saw me as, okay, this guy's he's of decent intelligence, at least he's at least above average, maybe a little bit. But the big thing about him is, I mean, I was passionate about everything, and they knew, okay, we'll just give him the idea and we'll let him take it and build it. It's like, put the muscle behind it. So we started a chapter,
Cool.
and you know, I had the energy and the desire to see something like that happen, and then that led to me getting connected with people who were, in the German Shorthair breeding world, and one thing led to another. I started getting a hold of really nicely bred dogs.
I like it. I like it a lot. So that's a lot of really good background. You've been at this a while, and though don't have necessarily a science degree or a background like that. I mean, it's you've got a lot of, would it be the real life experience, right? You've been there, done that, and you mentioned a couple different things that I want to start off with here now. Some terminology, okay? So there's a few different things that get talked about a lot, which would be one specifically would be inbreeding, or you said line breeding, and line breeding would be, to break those two down, like inbreeding and line breeding are the same thing, but they are different in a sense of line breeding is going to be not quite as tightly bred, and at the same time to move into a direction with your breeding. So basically all animals that are domesticated are line bred to some extent or inbred to some extent. And that's how you get consistency, because you are essentially shrinking the gene pool, which as you shrink that gene pool, the number of things that can be passed on get smaller and smaller. And then it allows you to have more specifics showing up in that offspring. If you do outcrosses, that would be another term that's used, that's going to grow the gene pool, which is going to give you slightly less consistency, right? And at the same time, has some other benefits. So some of the terms that we're going to be using today are going to be that line breeding versus inbreeding. It's going to be referred to as line breeding because what is happening with the development of a program is you're trying to breed in a direction, and that requires line breeding. We're going to talk about the coefficient of inbreeding. That'll happen here. Coefficient of inbreeding is going to be the actual percentage of genetic relation, basically. We have unique ancestors. Unique ancestors are going to be an individual dog that shows up, and when you do a line breeding, that one dog may show up more than once in a pedigree, most likely. We have those outcrosses, which would be breeding dogs that are not similarly related. And that's going to create some level of what's referred to as hybrid vigor. Okay, so strengthening genetics. Now, on the flip side of that, people have some pretty bad, connotations with the inbreeding or line breeding, or, the first thing that jumps into your head is how it relates to people specifically, right? So family members or things like that. And then that's going to cause issues from a health standpoint or a genetic issue standpoint, right? Line breeding, inbreeding causes issues, and that's not necessarily the case. So you said something to me when we were talking before, and I think this is something that falls in line. It's like when you start line breeding, we shrink that pool of genetics, right? And you find out how clean your lines are, right? That was
Correct.
that you specifically mentioned, how clean your
That's the
lines
term
are.
I use. Yes.
So, and I would guess, and we'll get into this a little bit, but over the years, you found some issues, something that you've had to breed away from, or you've had to maybe switch gears a little bit because of, and it may be something small, it may be something bigger, but at some point in time, you're going to find things, and it's just how you can move forward past that. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with regards to terminology specifically would be inbreeding depression. That term is basically if you are breeding too tight. Which, what is too tight? That's a question that people are going to ask, and we're going to look at some examples and talk about what those things mean, because I think that what is too tight is arbitrary. It's dependent on each individual situation and what you have and what's happening. So that inbreeding depression is what it's referred to as you if you are getting too tight, which could be things like repeated brothers and sisters, or brothers and sisters to parents, and you push down that path too far without having some form of an outcross mixed in with that, you end up with the things that you lose are like fertility, litter size. They also say vitality is the term that's used, or overall health and strength and of the individual animal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about they've done a lot of hybrids with fish. If you fish any Midwest or upper Midwest reservoir that's stocked of any sort, they typically have some form of hybrid fish mixed in. Like around here, we have wipers, white bass, striped bass hybrids. And with those hybrids, you get hybrid vigor. They did a largemouth bass, smallmouth bass cross, and they called them like tiger mouth or monster mouth or something to that effect. And they literally would just kill everything in the pond. So they couldn't do that anymore. It's too much hybrid vigor. So you've got a lot of different things that play into that. Those are some of the general terms that we're going to refer to. I'll probably retouch on as we're going to explain what those specific things mean again. But I want to jump past that now to advantages and disadvantages. And this is where you're going to have a lot of real world experience in this, right? So what are some of the advantages that you've come up with? Because you do line breeding. You just mentioned to begin with, your first dog was line bred, and you've kind of moved in that direction with the breeding process itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's, I just thinking about all the things you just went through there. This is like a buffet. There's like, what are we going to pick? Because there's so many things that are, you could really delve into here. One of the thoughts I had as I was listening to you, go through the list is, the audience, I'm going to make an assumption that most of the people that are going to listen to this, maybe they're interested in breeding dogs, or maybe they're already breeding dogs. And then there's people who, even though they never have an interest in breeding dogs, they have bird dogs. They want to have bird dogs, and they want to know how to pick the right line. How do those of us who are breeding, how do we get where we are today, or why do we choose the matings we've chosen? So now let's talk about it. First of all, for me, I'm like, okay, you mentioned a minute ago the background, the science. So I do have some, I have a master's degree in agricultural science, but I'm not a geneticist.
Sure.
But you made the point that's good, is that for me, my strength would be the applied, like I was putting it on the ground. Okay. Absolutely. I was getting dogs, and I would hunt. It wasn't like I hunted by myself all the time. You hunt with other people. You see different dogs. And so you see something that you go, wow, that's exceptional. And I'm going to start with, I zeroed in on this gene pool that I'm been working with for 30 years. Okay. And I'm going to call it the Hustler Windy. I'll say that's the foundation of my, what I kind of built my world around, was the Hustler Windy cross. Now, that particular breeding itself was not highly inbred. Okay. The dogs were related, and if you look at it, you go, oh wow, look at this. It goes back a ways, but it's it's Hill Haven's Hustler, bred to Wendy von Enstrom. Wendy von Enstrom was an Esser's Duke daughter, and her bottom side was Jan von Begelhoff, Jutta von Begelhoff, which was a German import, goes back to Elp von Hegehaus. The bottom line is they weren't unrelated, but it wasn't highly inbred. But I looked at what we had, and then I also looked at what other people were doing with that, with those dogs. And I'm like, okay, this is the playground I want to work in. I'm going to make this my sandbox, and I'm going to try to build on this, build around this. People had already. Here's the thing that I looked at with the dogs that I started working with, and that includes people like Emmett Berg, who was the Husselberg kennel. There was Bob Check, which is the Enstrom, the Dave and Jan Hill. You had the one thing I looked at here is you have a population of dogs to work with, and I think that's an important thing. Is like when you're picking a line, what's your how would I put it? What's the field you got? How big is your field?
Yeah, the
If you
available
have just
pool of other dogs similarly related, right? And you're talking about similarly bred
exactly.
dogs to work with.
Exactly, that's nailing it. It's like for me, I looked at it and go, okay, you look at the dogs out there that are well-known, famous dogs at the time. There was Stradivarius Baroque, there was Eric of Husselberg, there was Trekker von Grunbaum, all these dogs, and then there was Stradivarius. So the Stradivarius kennel was also rolling pretty big at that point in time, and he was working with the Hustler Windy stuff. So there was this population of dogs to work with. Plus, I was working, I had dogs that were out of Hustler and Windy, had stuff out of Hustler and Windy in them. And I'm like, I love the temperament. I love their how would I put it, their stamina, their strength, all the things you mentioned a minute ago that sometimes you would say this is part of line breeding is this depression. I wasn't seeing it. Now again, some of these dogs were, let's call their inbreeding, at numbers would be in the teens. Okay.
Sure. Let's
Or
let's
up
pull up an
my
example. Do you have a specific dog in mind? And I can pull that dog up that we can look at to help people follow along.
well, let's look at Baroque and just start over. Yeah, I saw you pulled him up a second ago.
Yep.
Look at his. Well, I mean, he's 5%. Okay, not very highly inbred. Now,
Yeah, so that, folks, is the coefficient of inbreeding, or that percentage of relation. What relation is all of his genome, basically? That's what we're talking about here. And you can see
exactly.
this is a pedigree breakdown. Shows owned by Emmett Berg. I've got a little bit of the information here. If you see a typo that I've got too, Fred, just let me know.
Okay.
But we've got sire here. It's Hillhaven's Hustler. He's a Hall of
Mhm.
Fame dog. He's going to show up in a lot of the stuff that we talk about today. And then Wendy, which you've got Wendy of the Instrand Kennels, or Vonder. Sometimes you see different abbreviations show up different places. Those
Mhm.
all mean of this kennel, essentially. So
Exactly. So here's some things we can sit here and look at this pedigree a minute on both sides of this pedigree. As I look at it, you go look at all there's some big time dogs in here, and they're not just big names. There's a reason they're big names. They were um, productive dogs, either first of all productive in the field and their performance. Secondly, they had been bred and proven to be. Look at Hillhaven's Hustler, for example, a very highly bred dog. I mean, I have no idea how many times he was bred, but he was very, very popular dog back in the period of time that I was just getting started. Now, wild bird hunting, the thing that I was doing, I saw how these dogs performed as well. They had all these natural things. They had natural backing, easy to train, natural retrievers. They had the water drive. And there were people in NAVDA also who were, the shooting star line was pretty dominant back in those days. And, a lot of his breedings were all around the Hillhaven stuff with some Instrom stuff and some Esser Greif and different things. But I looked at what people were doing, and I think one thing to say here is that I started studying just looking at dogs, like the American Field magazine. I subscribed to that, and I was looking at the dogs in the magazine, and I read books. I got a hold of the German Shorthaired book by Georgina Byrne. I started looking at stuff that Bob Whaley was doing with the LU pointers, and those I studied, okay, what are these people, what was their plan of attack? And line breeding became, pretty clear to me that that's the way I want it to go, because what you're trying, you have to establish, first of all, a vision for what you want. What kind of dog is like really stands out to you? That's the first thing. And, that's not going to be the same for everybody. It's kind of like you're standing there in front of a blank easel, like, okay, there's a portrait I want to paint. And it's what kind of dog? Well, for me, I mean, if I could have made Stradivarius Baroque over and over and over again, I would have done it. I mean, for me, that dog was the epitome of the German Shorthaired. I thought he was one of the most beautiful dogs I'd ever seen. So if I could have produced him again, well, so here's the deal. I started talking to people and I became connected to people. I mean, I'll mention Gary Hutchison is one out in Kansas, who's very knowledgeable on the breed. He's the guy I got Jacob V.D. Western from. And then there's another guy here in Columbia area. His name is Greg Bradley. And these two guys, keep in mind here, back in those days, people didn't have cell phones. We didn't have websites and we didn't have Facebook. If you wanted to talk to a breeder, you had to get on the phone at night with your landline and then, end up paying $400 in long distance phone bills. And that was a lot of money back then. But that's what Greg Bradley would do. And like, he was the guy that was always out there reaching out to people. The Stradivarius, I mean, he was close friends. He became close friends with Jean Pierre and started talking to him about his dogs. And he introduced me to people. He'd be like, he was the guy that did all the fishing, and then I was the one that sort of cleaned the fish. And I'm like, all right, I like, and so he put me, you might say Greg Bradley is the guy that put me, he and Gary, on the path that I ended up on with looking at this going, you know what? I learned a lot about the different lines, the Greif, so here's what I saw. The Greif stuff, there was first of all, a lot of people had line bred on Greif. And there was a lot of really nice Greif dogs out there as far as bird dogs, and they had done really well in field trials. And then there was the Hustler Windy stuff. And I'm like, all right, these are the dogs I'm going to work with. And you might say, I bought into the idea that, hey, if you want to set a type, the only way to set a type is by line breeding. Okay. So you asked, what are the advantages? I know that was a long way to get around to the answer to your question.
No, that's perfect.
But to me, the number, I hope that's okay. I guess I feel like it's important to go to kind of like, it wasn't like I just jumped in and said, okay, I'm going to line breed dogs. It was a thought process I went through. And trust me, when I got involved in NAVDA, for example, I'll just say it. I mean, this is not a negative comment. Okay. This is the world that I saw. NAVDA people weren't really on board that much, really, in my opinion, with line breeding. In fact, I would say people in general out there in the breeding world, they were a little wary of it. Okay. It's like, they didn't, I would say, not trust it. And so here's where I would go with that. It's like, I understand that. First of all, there's a couple things at play here. Human beings, we have this moral thing inside of us, right? We live by a moral code. And so inbreeding, line breeding is taboo in the human world, okay? That's sort of like a socially unacceptable thing.
Yeah.
So it isn't just that, so then there's a part that you go, wow, well, maybe the reasons it's not acceptable, or one of them is, of course, the morality of it. But then secondly, what kind of genetic issues it might cause. And it actually might, because we haven't been line breeding human beings. All right. You don't call human beings.
No.
You know what I'm saying? You don't, I'm not trying to be crude here, but it's like,
no, it's 100% it.
And so then you have this mentality that you think, oh, wow, there's problems with line breeding. You're going to have who knows what. Now, let's step over the line here to dealing with animals. And you made a perfect point a minute ago. When you develop a breed, how do you develop a breed of dogs? You do it by line breeding. You had to do that. Somebody along the line way back, whatever, decades ago, centuries ago, they decided, okay, we're going to develop a breed of dog. If you want to speak up there, Ethan, go
Yeah,
right ahead.
so I looked up a little bit because I know it's, way back, right? Whatever that is. They guesstimate anywhere between 12,000, and I saw another number that was 130,000. So who knows how long ago? Long, 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 long time ago. All dogs are essentially direct descendants of wolves. That's what the process happened. And
Mhm.
there was actually a similar study done with foxes more recently, and they started simply breeding out aggression. So they bred the least aggressive fox to another non-aggressive fox or least aggression present at the collective of foxes. And so as they bred the aggression out, it was like 7 to 10 generations. They started to see physical attributes change, floppy ears, different tails, different coats, and then selecting those specific traits, they would allow them to breed floppy-eared foxes that now look different and are different sized. And so that's where, line breeding is the only reason why we have different breeds today. That's
Right.
the selective process of picking traits and characteristics that got us here.
So there you go. That's excellent. And now let's say, okay, somebody did some line breeding at some point to develop the German Shorthair, and now here we are today in the United States with German Shorthair pointers that have been brought over. And like I said, here I became part of NAVDA. I started learning a little bit about NAVDA people and the things going on in the NAVDA world. And line breeding was not really part of the discussion. Um, Computer programs. I mean, so another thing I'll throw out there is my friend Greg Bradley introduced me to CompuPed,
Okay.
and that was back in the early '90s. Okay, and the guy that actually developed that program lived in Colorado. I mean, when you called the help desk for CompuPed, you got him, the guy that wrote the program, or a woman that was working in his office. And I'm just saying, it was unbelievable to me, a great tool. I couldn't even believe that there was something like this out there. And he had a database. And so, with Greg Bradley's help, I learned how to use the program. Gary Hutchison started using the program. But there were only one or two, and I'm not saying there weren't more, but there were only a few people, I'll put it that way, in NAVDA that were actually line breeding. And a lot of people really looked down on it. Okay.
Sure.
So now I'm going to throw something else out. Okay. That, it's maybe going to be controversial comment to some people. I don't mean it to be. But here's the thing: you've got a community of people who are breeding dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say there's you and me and 4 other people. To make it simple here, and all of a sudden, I'm going to say, look, I'm going to just do my own thing, right? I got this family of dogs I want to work with. So even though you may have you may have an outstanding dog or two in your kennel, I don't want to breed your dogs because they're not related to my dogs. That's not intentionally an offensive thing, but in my opinion, there's this pressure, in my opinion, that can be there for a person to, I'll call it a courtesy breeding if you want to. And like I said, I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm saying it's it's that versus sticking. Let's say you've made a plan and you want to stick with a family of dogs. It's not a negative thing. You're not saying anything negative about the people's dogs around you. It's that there's this vision you have and there's a path you want to go down. And I'm not going to chase the titles, or I'm not going to chase the popularity that might come with me jumping in and breeding with other people,
Well, that makes sense.
because this is where I want to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So basically, there are a lot of stud dogs that gain popularity over the course of time, and it kind of seems to be essentially a snowball effect. And from a statistical standpoint, I see like the second half or beyond that grows exponentially, or,
Hmm.
almost as they approach death, right? Where they can no longer be breeding. There's enough offspring out there for some really nice dogs that they became more and more and more popular, even if they don't fit what your specific goal is. So, though this is a really nice dog, breeding it with my dog creates that outcross, which eliminates our consistency, which could be beneficial if there's enough that ties, but it doesn't necessarily follow the plan. So you've got to be selective on what you're doing.
Correct. So I would say that's something that's there that a person has to think about when they're, yeah, I don't know how to put it. It's like your convictions inside. How strong are your convictions going to be? Are you willing to not be as popular as you would like to be, and go a pathway that may not be as, another factor is, marketability of dogs. Okay.
Sure.
Let's just throw that out there. All right.
Yep.
You might, let's say you got choice of 10 really nice males to pick from. And the dog that you really like the most and you think would be the best match for your female doesn't have the big titles, or maybe doesn't have any titles. Maybe the guy or the person, I shouldn't say guy, the person that, I mean, I'm sorry to say that, it's like,
no, yeah,
the world I've lived in is a bunch of guys. Okay. So the person that owns that male, they may just be, maybe they're just wild bird hunt and that they don't care about titles. But I mean, and it's not, you can't just ignore this. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this breeding, but if I breed his dog, who's going to want to buy puppies out of this dog that's, got no name at all? Nobody knows it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep,
So
absolutely.
I'm just saying those are things that play into this, that there's pressures. But let's just go back to sticking to your guns and going, okay, I've got a pathway I want to follow. There's light, and why do I want to do this? I believe that I can set a type, and I'm got dogs here to choose from. That's kind of what happened for me, is I ended up with all these dogs that were related, males and females. First of all, I owned Jacob, BD Westwind. And then there were people around me. John Shaver is one. Greg Bradley is one. That had males that I'm like, all right, all these dogs. Stradivarius Maximilian, he was out in Maryland. He belonged to Mike Visas. So if you wanted to, first of all, let's just look at something. If you go to Jacob's pedigree,
okay,
all right, look at Jake. Now, a minute ago, we were looking at Baroque, all right? Stradivarius Baroque, remember?
Yep, absolutely. Sorry, I was just
5%,
listening.
5% inbred. And so here's Jacob's mother. Look at Jacob's mother, sister to Baroque, all right? Full. I mean, she may not have been out of the same litter, but exactly the same breeding. She's 5% inbred. And you go up to Westwind's commander Riker, who was a Hustler's son. All right. And
so
he was
I'm going
line
to
bred
stop
on
you real quick here, just so people can follow a little bit. The colors showing up on these pedigrees right here are markers. It's something that this program does that makes it really easy to kind of follow. Every dog that is in color shows up more than once. It's a repeated ancestor, or is specifically a unique ancestor in the pedigree. So you've got here, so that you guys are following, Hillhaven's Hustler, Hillhaven's Hustler, right? You can see they're the same color. And then as you roll down through, all of these colored dogs show repeats. And I'll pull up an example here in a second that looks different. But so you're talking about Riker here.
Right. So this is a great, this pedigree is kind of a good example of how far we jumped. You went from a 5%, like Baroque was 5% inbred, and Megan here was 5, so she's a sister. We do basically look at this pedigree. It's a half brother, half sister, okay? Because you got a Hustler son bred to a Hustler daughter. Now, the other part that's important here is that the bottom side, the mother side. So, for example, let's go down to Megan. You got Wendy von Enstrom on the bottom, okay? She's a Esser's Duke daughter. Now go back up to Riker. Look at who Riker's mother was. Her name was Brana. Should say Brana. Yeah, I think it says Brana, but her name was Brana. She was, look at her. She's a double Esser's Duke granddaughter. So this ties a bunch of stuff in here. This is that mother line stuff we was talking about a little bit. Okay. I know. Listen, don't pull me into deep water on the mother lines, because I can't sit and really define it or explain it really well, except I look at this and I go, this is a perfect example of really solid mother lines, because the bottom side there's a lot of Esser's Duke in there. You've got a lot of the same stuff coming from all parts of that pedigree. And it's not just that it's the same stuff, it's that it's good stuff. You look at, now go look at that number, the inbreeding coefficient for Jake. All right, 19%. It went from, parents that were 5 to 10% maybe. And another thing to throw out here is, at least back in the day when I started in NAVDA, what's that?
Yep. So, Dad Riker here, the West Winds Commander Riker, is 4.02%. And then you've got this one we already know is like 5 point. No, I clicked the wrong dog. Sorry, folks.
No, there you go. It's easy to do in the program, believe me. It took me a while to learn my way around without causing a train wreck.
It happens. The gentleman that made this program is actually in Australia, and he's really nice to talk to, but it lacks something to be desired. Sometimes it feels like a little bit of. So here we are.
I love.
This is the Megan, who is Stradivarius Baroque's full or sister from maybe a different breeding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So she's 5%, but if you go back to Jacob, he's 19%. Now let me qualify something here. But so here's some comments I'm going to make. You talked a minute ago about the potential for depression of the breed or the line as you line breed. And I actually, I'm not arguing with that at all. I know it's absolutely been shown to happen. It can happen. You need to watch for it.
Yep.
And you also need to be selective. It might be you do a line breeding, and there's a pup or two that are frail, that have some kind of issue. That's, you just have to accept that might happen. And I'll say that in general, that doesn't happen in breedings we've been doing. Okay. I've never culled a dog. Is there ever a pup that's, there out of this many years of doing this, has there been a pup or two that were not, the most conformationally sound? That happens. We can talk about that more later, but I'm just saying you got to be prepared for that. And then you need to, as you said a moment ago, the strategy I think with most people that have done this a while is like, reach out to a dog or dogs from other lines that I would say, first of all, are similar. You don't want to jump completely off the rails, right? You've been going down a path and you've been having success, and let's say you needed a little strengthening. You could even read pretty sure it's the story of the Hegahaus kennel that's in Georgina Burns' book. And they saw that happening, because if you think we're line breeding tight, look at some of the Hegahaus stuff.
I've got an example to pull up here. Yes.
If you get into the 30s, then and again, we could talk about that. How hard is it to go from the 20s to the 30s? Let me tell you, you got to really start stacking it up to get into the 30s.
Yeah. So I just pulled up an example here. This is Ariel von Heghaus. So we've got, and excuse my pronunciations, I'm pretty bad at this. It's all just reading and guessing a lot of times, but
look at that pedigree.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing is colored. We explained, folks, that those are repeated ancestors, right? So, and that goes to 31.69, so almost 32. Now, this is something, I don't know how much, Fred, that you specifically look at this, but when we do these, a lot of times you can come up and there's a different portion here. Calculating the inbreeding, we base it off of 10 generations. Now, those 10 generations have 2,046 dogs, and you can go further than that. From the research that I found, the more the better, right? But at the same time, what I've been able to consistently and accurately pull is close to 10 generations roughly, which is a pretty good number, I think. So when we do this calculation here, first of all, we'll jump right to this report. The report shows we calculated off of 10 generations, coefficient of inbreeding. is 31.68888%, or rounded to 69.
Mhm.
And then the AVK, what is the AVK number? It's like a relation type of, I don't even know.
That's a number I'm not familiar with, honestly.
Well, let's
So I'm
see if
sorry
we
I
can
don't
find
know
it real
that.
quick here. AVK.
While you're looking for that, I think something to share here is we're talking about this COI or inbreeding coefficient, and maybe people listening are wondering what are we talking about. Um, it's an again, there's only so far and there's only so deep in the water I can go here with this personally, but I'll tell you that it's a number, and the higher the number, the more inbred your dog,
Yeah,
and
plain and simple, right?
it's also it's related to the they call it the homozygosity of your gene pool, versus being heterozygous. If in a way I describe it to people is this, first of all, everyone understands, the chromosome is made up of two strands of DNA, one from each parent. And so the parents, they got their own, it's on I call it like a string of beads.
Yep.
And if you want to make it even simpler for me, way I've explained it to people is this. If you have a parent that's a complete unrelated to the other parent, then think of it as one string is a bunch of blue beads and the other string is a bunch of red beads. And you put those red beads and blue beads together, but let's just say, for sake of simplicity, all the blue beads are dominant. That animal out of that mating is going to look blue. Okay, everything about
Sure.
it's going to be blue because the red's recessive. But now, if you cross that dog, he's not homozygous at all. He's completely heterozygous. Now you take that dog and cross that dog with another dog that's of different two strings of colors of beads, then you're going to get, like, that's when you start getting this hodgepodge. It's like all of a sudden all these different things show up.
Correct.
And let's go back to, let's say, there's no such thing as every blue bead and every red bead. It's going to be a mixture of colors. But what it is like, no matter whether the DNA strand from the mother and the father are very similar. It's like no matter which side of the strand you get your gene from, it's going to be the same colored a bead, and therefore the trait that you're looking for is going to be passed on no matter which parent that gene comes from. So the more homozygous, the more likely you're going to get the traits that you see standing in front of you. There's the phenotype, what you see, versus the genotype, which is, the DNA. And that's why in breeding, we do it. It's like, okay, and when you talked earlier about me cleaning up the gene pool, or I didn't clean it up, it was our people have done it before me, that it's dogs that I got a hold of. And I've proceeded down this pathway of line breeding on it. And I haven't had any train. I'm not gonna stand here and say there's never been I don't want to ever say that, because that's sure as heck is like shooting yourself in the foot to make a statement like that. And I'm just going to say that I've gone down this path and I've stayed on this path. And yes, there's things that there's individual dogs that pop up, and some breedings most breedings, you never know what you're going to get. It's like you put a breeding together and you think, wow, this is going to be awesome. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. But you got to just play the cards, roll the dice, and see what you get. I'm sorry, man. I interrupted you. I think you were going to talk some more about this pedigree.
No, that's fine. So I looked up the AVK. It's a German acronym, not even a try, but basically means ancestor loss coefficient. Every ancestor is unique. The AVK is 100%. So this is going to look at, when we pull this up, the number of unique ancestors. So if this number here, you can see right there, 219 is roughly 10% of 2,046. Okay, so what this means is it took 219 dogs to fill all 2,046 spots in this pedigree. So
Exactly. That's a small, when you think about it, that's a small number
it is.
of individual. Think about that. Well, so here's another. I wondered if that number meant or had any connection to what they call COR, which is coefficient of relation. I don't know if it does or not,
I don't know.
but that's another number they look at. It's like the sire and the dam. They're going to
Yeah.
look at those two individuals, and there you go. It's
Yep.
in your, yeah.
So
Gotcha.
this is creepy, folks. All right. So if we sort, we want to sort descending here. So you've got, I don't know if I can make this big enough so I don't have to scroll. Let's see here. All right. So here's a prime example. You've got percentage blood, right? That's 50-50. You've got both parents. This is the breakdown. So we have the dog, Ariel, and we have parents here. The 50-50 is provided 100% is the individual dog. And as you break these down, you would divide them out. So grandparents would be 25% unless they're repeated. Now, for example, here, this dog, Blanc von Heghaus is, nope. I'm looking at the sire, excuse me. Moonlight, okay.
Moonlight. Yep.
Moonlight, okay, perfect. The coefficient of inbreeding is 30%. You've got a coefficient of relation. This is 73%, which it is basically it's more related than the percentage of blood that it is what you're looking at. And you've got these other dogs down here. So count minimum generation. So the third generation should be roughly 25%. Those are grandparents. You got 50 and the minimum generation would be first, and then second is going to be 25, and then the third generation would be, I want to sort these by percent blood. I'm looking at the wrong thing here. Okay. Basically what it comes down to, this one's even more confusing to look at because of the fact that there's so much line breeding here. Let me pull up a better example for people to look at. Let's go back to Jake.
I want you to go back to this pedigree after you get through with Jake.
Okay.
Because I just want to show something that I saw there that I think's important.
All right, we're on Jake. We're going to go to calculate inbreeding, calculate. This is the 19%. Then we can come over here to percent blood. So this is pretty straightforward on this. You've got 50-50, right? And then you've got 25. Well, then 50, it's because Hustler shows up more than one time.
Right.
And then you've got these 12.5, and that drops down. Well, if you sort this out, you can look here at, you got, would be a good example right here. So this dog is essentially greater.
Oh, that's
Axel, right?
So I want to, right there. We don't have to go back to Raw Rife or not Raw Rife, but Ariel. Here's what line breeding does. Here's a dog named Axel von Wasserschlang, who was a post-World War II dog. I think he was discovered, but kind of emerged in the 60s and became a very popular dog in Germany, line bred. So he was not, first of all, this dog was not very highly line bred. He was pretty low, actually, pretty low numbers.
Yeah, 0.8.
But look at, I mean, he's very not inbred, okay? But here's some things to think about here. Even though he's not inbred, his sire and dam, this dog was a very prepotent dog, meaning he passed on his traits. That's why he was such a popular dog, because he was a great dog and he passed it on. So that tells me something. That tells me that the sire and the dam were very similar dogs, even though they weren't genetically related. The stuff coming from both of them, for that dog to be that prepotent, means that his mom and dad both were kind of out of the same stuff. That's the way I look at it. And so there was a good reason people line bred to this dog. In fact, it became at one point the Germans were having trouble finding dogs that weren't out of him, and they were trying to, let's say, outcross a little bit. Everything had Axel in it. But here's the thing to look at. Here's Jacob Beatty Westwind, who was born in 1994, and if you look at his ancestry, the ninth dog down in his list is a dog named Axel von Wasserschling that lived in the 60s. And I'm just saying, this is what line breeding does. If you're line breeding on a dog like, we're line breeding here on this Axel, really. Here he is way up here at the top of the list, even though we're 30 or 40 years later when Jacob was produced. So it's just a good example of what you can do with with the line breeding and the genetics.
Yeah, and basically he's showing with this percentage of blood, it's showing that he's more genetically, essentially, oh shoot, what's the word I'm looking for?
Importance?
Yeah, importance or responsible for more than great grandparent, even though he doesn't show up until the 5th generation, right? So
exactly
that's kind of how these things work. And when I look at different breedings, I pull up all of these things and I look at, you can sort descending by count. So like the number 1 dog in this pedigree shows up here and like these different things. And here's an example of, I do sample breedings a lot. We had, we bred a female named Snap to a male named, let's go, Cash, which you're familiar with. And that's one of those, it's part of what we were talking about before a little bit, but we don't have to go into that anymore. But
I mean, first, so while you're searching there, I'm just going to say this. You're doing, you're evaluating these pedigrees and breedings. You're looking at some stuff that I don't look at a lot. I mean, I think that's good to kind of broaden your depth of, how you're looking at it. So just for the sake of people listening, this program is so powerful, and it's important to look at another thing I would say is, and I've heard people say this, these are numbers, and you're right. They're just numbers, and they don't mean everything.
No, they definitely do not.
It's a part of the picture, and that's what a breeder has to, it's a tool you use in the toolbox. It doesn't, it's not like we sit here and we're going to put pedigrees together in a computer program and just go with it.
No.
It's like you're going to look ahead. That's the other thing you can do with this is I can look at dogs that don't even exist yet. You could put breedings together and look at dogs that don't exist and see what it looks like. But that doesn't mean you're going to do it.
It's all speculation.
You still have, right. You still have to see what those animals are like when they're alive, what kind of dog are they?
So I do a little bit.
Go ahead.
I do a little bit of this in reverse, exactly what you're talking about. So it's part of it. I go, I really like that dog, right? So what is that dog? What made that dog? And then how can we find other things that kind of follow suit with that, which I'm nowhere near in the game long enough to be as down the path, even though we're trying a little bit. We've struggled with a lot of different issues along the way that's involved a lot of washing out. And whether that was the right or the wrong thing to do at that time, I don't know. We always made decisions to try and be better and produce something that's healthier and betters the breed. So we made some hard decisions on dogs that up front were quality dogs, but were maybe potentially throwing issues or something to that effect. So we made decisions to make hard cuts basically, but this would be an example. Axel, who we were talking about before, he showed up 18 times, and this pedigree shows up 57 times. And the percentage of blood is basically the same, but he doesn't show up until the 7th generation versus the 5th generation. So just another example of how the line breeding stuff can happen, and how you can kind of
go
speculate,
back to,
right?
Yes. There's so many things to talk about, and like we get down a path a little ways and then we start on another path. And one thing I want to go back to, and I mean, it's good, right?
Yeah.
There's stuff to talk about. Go back to Ariel von Hagehaus. And so here's a couple comments I want to make. First of all, we were talking about I use the Hegehaus kennel as an example, and I'm quoting this right out of, I think it's Georgina Burns' book, where she kind of taught, and there's a section of the book that talks about all the different important kennels in Germany and the United States and Australia and England, and so the Hegehaus kennels, that's a big name, and back when the Straumans were uh, building that kennel, they got to a point, at least this is what I remember reading, where they were having, let's say, small litter sizes, or they were having some kind of issue with their dogs, and they said, okay, we're gonna beef up our gene pool. So you'll look here at this aerial, and I saw Ciro. So somewhere in that list there was Ciro.
Yep, number 12 here.
There he is, right there. Okay, so if you actually, he's a beautiful, beautiful dog. And if you look at, first of all, that dog was like an outcross for them. And he had, I think it was something about his shoulders and his front end, if I remember right. There were things like that they were looking for. But here's what I haven't studied his pedigree that much, but I would suspect when you want to go out and do an outcross, you're going to look for a dog that's produced from, I would call it even a line. So you want a dog that's not just a product of a bunch of outcrosses. You would want to get a dog, in my opinion, that is something that's a product of somebody else's work they've been doing line breeding on, and bring that into your line and hopefully get what you're looking for. And then you can go right back into your line, carrying forth that, improvement on your line. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep.
If you look at that picture, there's a photo in the book of Ciro. Absolutely a gorgeous dog. And if you look at the profiles of a lot of the Hegehaus dogs after him, it's like the dog put his stamp on that line, the kennel, that I think they still have today. It's like, it's so amazing how much impact that one dog had on improving their line. So
we
that's just something I wanted to share there.
We rabbit holed a little bit, but if you can throw out there, because it all started with, what would you consider an advantage of line breeding? And I think we've touched on it, but I want to say the specific words. Like, what would you consider as an advantage of line breeding? I mean, why do it?
Well, so number one, I'm going to say is you're increasing the predictability of the outcome of your breedings. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm setting a type. When people come, for example, litters, you don't want just uniformity, you want quality, right? I want
Correct.
Uniform quality. So I feel like I've done that. I get my breedings, the puppies out of my breedings, they look a lot alike. They're the sizes alike. You can predict what they're going to be like as dogs. So, hey, I'll just say that and stop there. That's the number one advantage, is you're setting a type, then you're improving your predictability of what the outcome of your breeding is going to be.
And I mean, ultimately that's a requirement of moving forward, and you said before that it's kind of at the time, within NAVHDA, when you were specifically starting, that it was kind of unheard of, or it wasn't done as much, or it was, I think that the popularity of line breeding has grown some, but still not even that much. I think that there's still a lot of folks, especially greener folks, that only look down or are scared of it or don't understand it. So they say, well, we can't do anything that looks like. And I mean, some of our breedings, Fred, are like 12% or 15%, and people will comment on like, that seems pretty tight. And I'm like, we haven't even begun to touch tight in this aspect. I mean, it's just like a baby line breeding towards some direction, right? So it's,
Agreed.
I think that it's still pretty.
So here's the thing. Yeah, I agree. And I'm not going to sit here, or any conversation I would have with anybody, I'm not going to try to convince someone that's what you need to do. It's like, if you're not comfortable with it, that's fine.
Yeah.
We all have, the way I look at the breeding of dogs is, this is my vision. This is my little corner of the portrait. It's my own little individual portrait that I'm painting of what I want to see a German Shorthair pointer be like. And then if you want to play with some of those dogs, and people down the line, for example, want to pull dogs like that into their line and make their own recipe, hey, that's great. And I really think that's one thing we ought to, how would I put it, support it and like recognize the fact, hey, that's a good thing. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Some good things that happened to me early on were, first of all, I had those nice, and we didn't talk much about those pedigrees yet. I don't know if we have time to do it, but if you look back at the pedigrees of the females that I started with, they were all very closely related, and they had a lot of the Stradivarius stuff in them. That, of course, I said the Hustler Windy and a Jacob Beatty Westwind, and he had, the related males out there out of him. And I started down this path, and I put dogs in the hands, and so, hey, I got some nice dogs. Okay. I produced some nice dogs. I bred to Kristen von Potsiepen, which that's another line of conversation. Back in the day when I was in NAVDA, there were people like, there weren't like a ton of really awesome males out there, that that wowed you. It's like,
Sure.
Where are these males? So Willie Engelking, he's bringing over these German, so I mentioned Stradivarius Kennel, who was up in Canada. So he was bringing over dogs from Germany, because he was actually close friends with Karen Strawman. Then along comes Willie Engelking, the Riverwoods Kennel. He imports first Orson von Potsiepen. Okay. Nice dog, right? Everybody's like, oh, wow. It kind of rippled through NAVDA. It's like, hey, did you hear Willie Engelking's got this nice dog? His name's Orson. And okay, so what amused me is how a lot of people in NAVDA kind of flock, like, oh, wow, man, this dog's awesome. I'm going to breed to this dog. Well, guess what his inbreeding coefficient is? And he's like 19. Okay, I'm thinking, this is hilarious, kind of. You guys don't think line breeding is a good idea, but you're flocking to, you're going with your money in hand to breed. And and I'm not making fun of them. I'm just saying, you guys don't understand. You're breeding to this dog. What is his percentage of inbreeding? His inbreeding coefficient is 25. Okay, you're wanting to breed to this dog because he produces himself. He's a producer. Well, then Willie Engelking brings over Kristen. All right, I was actually going to breed to Orson, and my friend Greg Bradley went up to Engelking's with my female Demi to breed to Orson. And he calls me and he's like, hey, did you know that he has Orson's father? And I said, no. And I ended up going that route with Kristen. And I had my reasons, but I had nothing against Orson. I'm just saying, here's this really dog that became really popular and important in the NAVDA world, was Kristen and Orson. And then they became bred a lot. Deadwood Kennel, and of course, Sharpshooter. But let's go back to what I was saying. I got my dogs in the hands of some people who did a lot with them. One of them was Donnie Ebersol, Friedelsheim Kennel. Then another guy was Tate Stratton with Stillwater. Those guys took dogs then they got from other people. And that would be like, for example, Donnie went with Greg Fry's stuff with Deadwood primarily, and he mixed, let's call it, he made his own, let's call it his own recipe. With mixing the Thunder Sundance Revelation with some Deadwood stuff and other things. And look what Donnie's done. I mean, it's amazing. And then Tate took he had a dog named Zane. It was closely related to Thunder, but they're different. Zane doesn't have any of the Kristen stuff in him, whereas Thunder was out of Dixie Chick, and her sire was Kristen. But anyway, I'm just saying, so there was a little bit of, let's say the
dog. I'll
soft
pull it up so people can look at it too. Just tell me
which dog is that?
I'm saying, whoever you want to talk about, let me know and I'll pull up their pedigree.
Okay. So. Let's just pull up Sundance Revelation for the fun of it. And I'm just going to share with you, so he's a Jake's son. And his mother was Dixie Chick, Sundance Dixie Chick. So Dixie, I call her Dixie. She was out of Kristen von Potsiepen. So here you look at, a minute ago we were looking at area von some of the Hegehaus stuff, and look, you got Mondlik in there. If you look behind, so Kristen von Potsiepen, he don't sound a Hegehaus at all, does he? And you're thinking, okay, he's a Potsiepen dog. Well, look at his pedigree. It's It's a heavy dose of Hegehas, okay? They did. I mean, I'm just saying that's a perfect example. Those
Mm-hmm.
people over there, they're going, okay, I got my pot seeping stuff I've been working on here. Now I'm gonna drag in some Hegehas, and they're not unrelated. That's like, if you
When you
look
pull
back
this
a
up,
little
it's
ways,
Cairo is in there a lot.
yeah,
So this is
yep.
Kristen's pedigree. You've got Cairo,
Well, look
Cairo,
at that.
Cairo, Cairo, Cairo.
Yeah, it's funny. This isn't being. I call him Ciro. So just
Oh, Ciro.
to me, I'm like, if people are listening, they might go, "Who's Cairo?" It's so you might pronounce it Ciro, Cairo, whatever. But that dog was an influential dog in Germany, and look where he's at, and how many times he's in this pedigree,
Mm-hmm.
and it shows you the power. This shows you the power of a single dog in the influence of the breed and like look at Kristen von Potsiepen, the influence. I bred to him 5 times. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
um, just to give you an example, I took related. This is another thing that you look at if you another book I would recommend people get and read it from one cover to the other would be the book Snakefoot by Bob Whaley. And why? Because if there's anybody more successful as a breeder, and I don't care if it's dogs or what, then please let me know who that is. Bob Whaley established the LHU pointer line. And that, first of all, he was very wealthy, so he could do this himself. He pretty much did it in house, but he produced lots and lots of litters of dogs. And by the time, in the 90s, when I was, like I said, 80s and 90s, when I was looking at American Field magazines all the time or looking at Pointing Dog and the Pointing Dog Journal, Gun Dog, all these classified ads. Who were the pointer guys advertising? It didn't matter. Every pointer guy out there, practically, and I'm not going to say every. I'll qualify by saying almost every.
A lot, yeah.
LHU pointers, and you could take 1,000 pointers and line them up and mix 100 LHU pointers in there, and you could walk down the line and you could pull them out of the line with no trouble. That's because he was selective in his breeding. He bred really, really tight. Okay,
Really tight, yeah.
his success is amazing with what he did, and that's something that really hooked me. And here's some things that I took hold of in his book was this whole concept of identifying, first of all, dogs out there that the dogs out there in the world that he liked, the ones that really impressed him, they looked like what he liked. And then he would get, let's say he got several females that were closely related, that were out of that same gene pool, and then he picked out 3 or 4 males that were the kind of dog he liked. And I don't know if they, maybe they were related or not, but he would breed those related females to those hand-picked males and crisscross them, like breed all of those, let's just say theoretically breed all those females to the same males. And now you're building a family of dogs that you can work from. And then you just watch for, you're making, you're hoping there's not health issues and that kind of thing that you have to deal with. Litter size issues is something that is talked about as part of the problem with line breeding.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that quickly enough. And okay, well, I'm going to have to do something here to beef up my line because they're basically becoming frail. And I haven't seen it, so I haven't seen it yet. And the stuff that I'm doing, we got litters, average litter is 8, 10 dogs. You look at the structure of the animals themselves. Are they still normal sized animals? That's the kind of stuff you're looking at. But, I haven't seen a problem yet.
So, we talked about the advantages. It's definitely the way to build consistency. And then disadvantages we've talked about, but the disadvantages come from 2 main factors, I think, and that would be one, health wise, right? So if you've got
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy dogs and you are breeding them in a line breeding fashion, you're going to see that unhealthiness repeated. And that's what's going to be
Mm-hmm.
consistently showing up. So you've got to
Mm-hmm.
have quality animals to be able to move forward with. And in order to
Mm-hmm.
get to that point, you either, I think this is one of the number one issues with the average person trying to breed. And I'm not talking about all of the guys out there that have made a name and have done all of the good things. Some of the folks that you've already mentioned, all of those kennels are leaps and bounds above where I'm at. But the average person that thinks I'm going to breed dogs and I'm going to make money doing this or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is kennel blindness. And it's, I have this dog, therefore it should be bred. And,
Mm-hmm.
getting away from that aspect of it. So this is something I say, and I'm curious to know your opinion on it because some people don't agree with me, but I am a firm believer that everything is genetic. Everything that you see in a dog is genetic, whether that is a true genetic trait or genetic predisposition to be something. I feel like on average, it takes a fair amount of, it takes a lot to stray the dog from its natural path. So people say, I hear this as a dog trainer. We get dogs from other kennels or we get dogs from other situations. And people are like, this dog was abused or it was mistreated or mishandled by a trainer. I advocate for other trainers as often as possible because there's not very many people out there that abuse dogs. I don't believe that that's a thing. It is a thing, but it's not a super, super common thing. And I think that, so dogs are predisposed to be shyer or to have these, mental instabilities based off of a breeding. I don't think that, I think it takes a lot to create those issues. Like it's, so I'm a believer that everything is genetic. Now, that doesn't mean that we can whelp a litter of puppies and they come out and magically go and become master hunters or versatile champions or field trial champions, or even just be the best hunting dog in the whole world. There is training, there's development that happens, but with good amounts of encouragement and development, dogs that are good and have the characteristics and have the things, they move that direction pretty easily. It's the dogs that struggle, and this is what I'm talking about with developing the program that we have and the dogs that we have. If I've got a dog that struggles with something, those are dogs that I say, is this, is it struggling through something that I feel like we should have more natural ability in, or is this something that we shouldn't be struggling in? Because if we breed that dog, the offspring is going to struggle in similar areas, or a portion of the offspring are going to struggle in similar areas. So there is no such thing as a perfect dog. You've got to find dogs that have balances. And this is something that you've said on multiple occasions, looking for, you mentioned a specific shoulder or build, body structure, ability, things like that. You've got to find dogs that balance each other out and complement each other. But everything is genetic. And this is something that I try and not look past. Oh, this was created, or it's because the dog didn't get enough of this or that. I believe that everything is genetic.
Well, I agree to that. I agree with that too. Overall, I agree with what you're saying. There's just some qualifying things that there's some question marks I have.
Sure.
For example, let's just look at hips. Okay, we're all pretty diligent nowadays about examining hips, and German Shorthair pointers as a breed are pretty darn good. They don't have, I don't know of any. I don't know people that are walking around with dogs with hip dysplasia. So,
Nah.
but let's just talk about that a second. You know, I've taken dogs that had, let's say, OFA good, OFA excellent hips, and you get individuals that are OFA fair, or you take a dog. Dixie, for example, the dog I talked about a minute ago, her hips were OFA fair. All right, I'll just throw that out there. Now, that didn't trouble me. Now I know people who say I would never breed a dog with OFA fair hips. I've heard it. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. That's your choice. To me, that evaluation says that dog doesn't have hip dysplasia. If you look at a German pedigree,
Yeah.
they don't even qualify it. They just say HD free. They don't even say good, fair, excellent. All I'm saying is I look at it and go, wow, how come I don't get, if I read an excellent to an excellent, why don't I get excellent hips? It don't always happen, right?
Yeah.
but I do agree that what you said is good, because I think it might not be so easy to identify or tag a trait onto a certain gene, but there's something there that you can say, yeah, it seems like there might be a little something here where there's a propensity. It's easier for this dog to have this kind of problem than other stuff out of other lines.
Correct.
For example, temperament's a good example. It's like I've seen it and I don't like dealing with it. If you've got dogs with temperaments that are, it could even be a complete surprise to you. They could be like going on, they're like 7, 8 months old and they've been fine. You've not seen any issues. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden one day they're concerned about a loud noise, or they're quirky about their training. Things bother them more than they did before.
Sure.
And you're like, what in the world is going on? And I do believe that there's something in there in the genetics that makes, and they'll go through it. They'll push through it most of the time, but you gotta, what the word is, tiptoe through it somehow and find
Yeah.
your way. And I don't, for me, when you think about the people you're selling dogs to, they're not pro trainers. They don't have the skills to figure out that stuff. So you don't want to, that's stuff I like to avoid because I don't want other people to have to deal with it.
Exactly.
But
So
I do. You go ahead. I'm sorry, man.
no, exactly what you're saying though. So is what can you pinpoint a specific gene? Probably not, but there is a some level of predisposition for that to happen, and whether whatever the cause may be. Any time that I've looked at something like that and gone, oh well, it was because I did this or I did that, and we'd go ahead with a breeding of some sort, right? We see it again,
Mhm.
and you said the sensitive aspect of it, it goes the same direction with the aggressive action. If that dog shows up at the 7 months or 12 months or 16 months, kind of when maybe a male comes into his own, and all of a sudden now he's a jerk and he's trying to start fights with everything, he's going to throw that. It's
Mhm.
not that you put him in a situation where he should have to fight for his life and he became this, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's there to some extent. So um, it's just words to think about if you're considering
Mhm.
breeding, right? Again, I say there is no such thing as a perfect dog, but having a path or a plan that involves things, and then having in your mind, I'm sure that you have some. What are those disqualifications? You mentioned that you don't deal with the sensitive um, type of disposition, right? So that would be a
Mhm.
disqualification. If you got a dog that falls into that category, I'm assuming I'm putting words in your mouth now, but
No,
um,
you're absolutely right. I made a decision a long time ago that when I started, and it's like I've worked with some dogs way back. I used to be a little more open to working with dogs from other people. I'd get asked to work with a dog. And I had, there's been a dog or two along the way for me that all of a sudden had a gun sensitive issue, and somebody would say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" But you look at it and go, "Okay, I can get them through it." I
sure,
mean, really, it's not. I've done it a lot, and you can get a dog through it. And sometimes it's purely, it was a really bad, experience for the dog. Something happened that caused them to be there, and they got over it quickly.
sure,
But for me, it's a flag, and it's like I have kind of a zero tolerance for gun sensitivity, for example.
hmm
I don't really want to see people having to deal with that, or it's quirkiness in training. If you've got dogs that fold on you, I'll put it with, and we're not talking about heavy pressure here. We're just
no,
talking about handling them and trying to teach them, and they respond the wrong way, and they're just not fun to work with. That's also kind of off. I mean, I'm done with that. It's like it's so energy. First of all, it's not much fun to get up in the morning and think, okay, I got to go out and work with this dog, and it's going to be a battle. But it's so much fun. Like if you've got a dog that's like really happy and upbeat, and man, they just love working with you.
yeah.
That's energizing, and it's like
Let's
fun
go
to go
do it.
out there
What
and work.
can we do today, right?
Yeah, you're excited to do it, instead of dreading it. So that's the kind of dog you're trying to produce. And I think something to throw out there to people. I mean, I'm not going to say this is true for every, this is obviously not true for every breeder, but I say most of us, we're trying to create dogs that people are going to love, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want that to happen. So the stuff we've been talking about here a little bit, the things that are negative that pop up, believe me, it's heartbreaking when it happens. Let's say somebody gets a dog that has a health issue, or the dog has a, let's say you had this big vision that you were, you have a dog that you think we're going to campaign, and you put a lot of time and money into it. And let's say it has a bite issue, or it's not the size you wanted, or it's temperament. I mean, maybe it's a male that all of a sudden, like you said, all of a sudden is fighting with people, fighting with dogs.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a downer. And you hate to see it happen to people. You're not like you planned it,
No.
so these are
No.
things that we can't control, that, you do your best to plan these breedings, and you can't control the outcome. You can just deal with it after you get it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll
Exactly.
throw that out there.
I've got two, and I don't know. I've taken a lot of your time today, Brad. I don't know what time you've got left available.
I've got, I mean, I got some more time if you want to carry on, or if you want to, talk again sometime. But what did you have something specific you wanted to follow up with here?
Yeah, well, I've got this is something that there's going to be some similar genetics in, and these are this breeding that I planned for this year, and it's kind of what spiked a lot of this thought process. Something I know that you've done a fair amount of, and it actually works around similar lines to what you've line bred on. So it's not the same. So it's but I wanted an opinion. I wanted you to take a look at it and let me know your thoughts, or if you even have thoughts. So we've got a breeding. Vex is one of my dogs, falls into that category of, does all the things for me, checks all the boxes, and he himself is not tightly line bred, but we've tried to move in that direction because of all the dogs that I've worked with. He ends up like I said, he checks those boxes. So if I have the opportunity to make more of him, that's my goal. Because, so this, yeah. So this one's a little bit more of the out. It's headed in the direction of line breeding more. So we've got Vex here, bred to Trix, and she is a Vex granddaughter. Yep. And her coefficient of breeding is that 17.25. And I'll pull just dogs up so you can see everything there.
Okay. Yeah. So I see and so you're planning this, or you've done this?
Planning this, have not done it.
Okay. And so, I mean, for me, first of all, I mean, I look at the pedigree. I'm just studying it. That's the silence you're hearing as I was looking at the pedigree. I mean, it looks great to me. What do you have a specific question?
No, not specific questions. It comes down to, yeah, that's a good. What are we looking at here, Ethan? I don't. So this.
What about the dogs themselves? How similar are those dogs? The two dogs you're putting together.
They would have, they have similar characteristics. I think. You're going to see a little bit difference in. Let's see. These are some of the things that I kind of looked at on the back end of doing this as well. You show these are the dogs that get repeated on in this breeding. These are some of the dogs that we have talked before, but so this is more like back end line breeding is happening here, where in the breeding examples that we were looking at of your dogs, these were the dogs showing up at the beginning of the pedigrees.
Right. And it's a nice list of dogs. So that's one thing I look at and go, look at that, the lineup there. It's a lot of older dogs that are coming up at the top of your list. I mean, what's the female's name? Trix?
Yep.
And is that a dog you own?
Yes. Yep.
And so you know a lot about this dog. You know her temperament. I know, obviously, Vex. he's been bred a few times, right? So you know
Mm-hmm.
he's how well he produces. What about Trix? Has she been bred before?
No, this will be her first litter. She's just right at that 2
Okay.
mark, and similarities that I saw come down
Hmm.
to personality aspect of things. They're similar personality, but I would say that her personality leans more towards her mother. So she's a little,
Hmm.
I don't want to say softer personality because she's not at all, but he's a little more of a go-getter type of attitude, and she's a little more even keel when it comes to that. So I look at that as a potential of a trying to balance, right? Everything that I look at from a breeding standpoint, we look at trying to balance. If you breed high power to high power, it continues to trend that direction into
Hmm.
maybe more power, or if you breed low key to low key, it trends that direction to where you may um, lose stuff completely. So try and find some kind of a balance. But their hunting pattern, style, ability, nose, point style, all of those kind of things are very, very similar in the field. Where she
Hmm.
hunts and acts and behaves very much like her dad, and then more around the house or that type of thing, she acts a little bit more like her mother. So I would say um, similar but different, right? I mean, there are some similarities there.
How about, if you don't mind, pull up the pedigree again?
Sure.
And as I ask you to do that, it's just because I'd like to look at some of the dogs again in the pedigree and just kind of look at, um, what's when you look back a little ways. I see. First of all, I see on the top and the bottom. I see the double roke dog, uh, Sir Henry Higgins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which, okay, that catches my eye, right? Because that's stuff that I like was Baroque. I see a lot of the sharpshooter stuff and some shooting star stuff, which is all related dogs, um, on the top and the bottom. When you go down to the bottom, I see a dog named Cooper, which is Countryside Show and Go Cooper, and his mother is Indian Brooks Emmy. She was a Jake daughter, so that's right there. See, she's a daughter of Jacob and a hustler. That was a breeding that we did with Jacob Beatty Westwind and Tom Swayze's female named Crystal. Produced 10 puppies. Cheryl Asmuth, so Cheryl's dog Mazzy, who was a sister to this dog Emma that was in that pedigree.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Steve Reese actually owned Emma and then sold her to Jeff Chapman. All I'm getting at is I know there's some things I know here about these dogs. I know what people told me about them. Um, and I'm like, these were bird dogs, right? They were wild bird dogs and they were really good bird dogs. So I guess I'm looking at this going, okay, Vex and Tricks, and I know you hunt. So I'm assuming your target is you're producing hunting dogs, but I guess I would assume you're also not all, it's like, even though you think, well, the hunting dog is the same target as a testing dog, right? No, and I'll just say it. I'm not saying they're exclusive, but I'm saying there's a lot of dogs that test well that don't really produce that well as a wild bird dog,
It's true.
vice versa. But if you're looking for certain traits, for example, are you looking for the master hunter stuff? Well, dogs that are easier to handle, right?
Yeah, bird
Master
dogs.
hunter, a dog that's, you can steady them up and handle them, and they're not going to take you off the rails. Um, well, a wild bird dog, you might want a dog that'll take you off the rails once in a while, and so you don't pass every test with that dog. But I'm assuming you're looking here at a little bit of balancing, but it sounds like this is more of a you're creeping up there more higher in your inbreeding coefficient than you're used to, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a little bit. Now, this is the other example. So that's the one and that one I feel comfortable with. Like that, I have no issues. I'm interested to see what comes
Mhm.
out, and it's one of those things that I'm gonna, it's what I'm gonna find, right? I haven't experienced health issues out of any of his breedings or any of those kind of things. Nothing red flag wise. But as we
Right. So time
do,
out.
yeah, as we
Time
do a
out a
tighter
second.
breeding, we're gonna find out. Now, this is the one
Right.
that and I don't know if you have done or have examples specifically of, but this would be Trix's mother. And this is something I've considered doing. This gets tighter. So this is 30%. Okay, so this is Vex to his daughter. Again, like I explained, my goal being I would love the opportunity to figure out how to essentially reproduce him. And him being not overly tightly bred himself, he throws aspects of him, but not... I personally don't have a complete package, right? You know, like I don't have that dog that is the same again.
All right, so for me, here's where I would go with that. Here's the way I would, let's say you want to do that and you want to try it. Well, before you try that, take a son of Vex. This is stuff I did.
Okay.
When I was like afraid, like a little bit afraid, like, oh, what if I do that, man? Okay, so take a son of Vex and breed her to a son of Vex first and see what happens.
So if son of Vex to daughter of Vex, that's what you're getting at, right?
Well, yeah, I guess that's or so be like half, I would probably go half brother, like a half brother, half sister breeding, which if you look at it, like if you went back to that raw rife dog, or the aerial dog, look at all the half sister, half brother breedings that were done there. It's not unheard of. But if you take, I guess what I'm looking at is like, if you're a little bit nervous about it, or if you have some question marks, I mean, first of all, here's some things you're in your database, in your knowledge bank, in your brain. You've done some breeding, so you know, okay, this female here, Quest, is that her call name?
Yep.
Okay, so Quest, has she been? So you probably know something about her litter mates, right? How did the rest of the litter look? How did they do? What kind of dogs were they?
Yeah, I don't know as much. We actually got Quest from she bred to her maid of honor to Vex, and we got a puppy from that litter. So,
so this is all right. Yeah, so this is Cheryl's. All right. So, but I mean, you could probably look into some of the NAVDA results and different things, and probably talk to Cheryl about it too. And no, I mean, to me, I think it's pretty solid. I mean, I really like it. And I think you're mixing, the upper side would be, I'm going to call it more of the sharpshooter stuff is in there.
There's some, yeah, absolutely.
But on the bottom side, it's not quite as much sharpshooter. And I think the Outlander, the countryside dog, I think that's a good blend. And it's, these are not lines that are with question marks. There's not, I look at that pedigree and I'll go, okay, this is another thing I talk about is like holes in a pedigree. If you look at a pedigree and you start seeing, like there's sections of it that are like go-to dogs that you've never heard of,
Yeah.
That are just kind of, there's no titles, there's no name you recognize. Those scare me, all right? And I call them holes. It's like, that's a black hole. You don't know what's back there. But you look at this pedigree that you've put together and put in front of me, I kind of study it, and those little color coding deals are nice, aren't they?
Yeah,
you can look at that and you can see where these
connects.
Right. And it's really like, look how awesome that looks. It's like stair-stepped. And so you see where dogs appear in the pedigree more than once. And you can go, okay, that's pretty cool. Wow, these dogs are connected. And I see a lot of, you go all the way back there to the 5th generation, and there isn't a dog in there. There isn't a hole in the pedigree. I don't see any gaps. Everything in there has got some history behind it that I recognize. And, it's still going forward for a reason. It's like, it would have, if there were problems, you'd hear it. You'd already know about it.
Sure.
It's not like not like there may not be a problem. You don't know because, stuff happens that, it's not always so these two dogs are flawed because they produced a flawed puppy. No, that those two dogs matched up together produced something that was flawed. But maybe there's some outstanding ones in the litter too. You can't, that's the other thing I think you got to recognize as a breeder. It's like, what? I know some people feel awful if they get a dog out of a litter that's got a problem of some kind and they feel responsible somehow. And it's like, You can't be responsible for that. You can only be responsible for it if you continued breeding those two dogs together, or if you ignored it, then then it's a problem. But you're going to have, no matter how hard you try, you're going to have stuff pop up that's going to bother you, and you just got to roll with it and deal with it. It's not easy. I think that'd be a great breeding, personally. I mean, just based on the looking at it on paper, you
Sure.
know.
And and that's what we've got is on paper. And like I explained a little bit, I just didn't know if there's anything you would jump out from whoo, buddy, that doesn't look like it would be a good idea. And, I felt fairly
Well,
confident about it, but it's definitely new territory for me. So,
I can give you, like, my strategy back then is I was playing it. First of all, I was playing it by ear a little bit, but I bred Jake. I mean, I didn't just breed to Jake. I bred Jake. Now, I did end up breeding Jake to most of the females that I owned,
mhm.
but I bred to a lot of other dogs, not just Jake. But one of the my foundation dogs, that was Jake and Demi. Those were like the team, the A team. Those two dogs, they just lit me up. They did so many things that I loved, and I wanted to. That's like who I wanted to recreate. So then you're like, okay, I want to breed those two dogs together. Okay, well, that was kind of in the back of my head. In order to get to that point, I did things like I took a Jake son and bred him to Demi, and I took Demi daughters and bred her to Jake.
Mhm.
So and those actually worked better. I later then did breed Jake to Demi and got 10 puppies, but I had probably 2 or 3 out of 10 that either had a butt bite or an undershot bite. And
Okay.
I didn't like that. I'm just giving you an example here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Neither one of those dogs had a bite problem, but Demi had a butt bite. Okay. I'm going to throw that out there.
Sure.
She had a butt bite, and you know what? I had a little bit of a, you might say, wrestling match with myself in the beginning. Like, wow, is that okay? But then, I came to terms with it. It's like, you know what? I got a really special, great dog here that's got a lot of things to offer. And so she's got a butt bite. And I bred her and tried to, you might say, confront it head on, and breed the dogs that I thought wouldn't. First of all, I didn't breed any dogs that had a bite issue. And, almost every litter, except when I bred her to Kristen, and there was not, well, actually, it was when I bred her to Jake's son. When I bred her to Jake's son, that was Oak. Not a single dog there wasn't a single dog with a butt bite or an undershot bite. I'm using that as an example
Hmm.
of the things I'm sort of being transparent here.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
that was you know, I'll throw that out there. It's like that was something no other dog I had, none of the other dogs. And Demi's bite, another thing was that butt bite came on like between 10 months and 12 months. Didn't
Yep.
happen when she was young. But I'm not, for me, I'm not ashamed I did it. I'm proud of the dog, and I built around her and Jake, but I wanted to find ways to get. That's not an easy thing to really eliminate, because it's not just one gene that controls that.
Correct. They're
It's
independently
multiple
inherited,
genes.
right?
Yeah. So there you go. I'll just throw that out there. It's like some of the stuff you got to try at, eventually. I mean, I don't have, I'm not going to say I never have a bite problem now. There's still a dog or two here and there that'll pop up with a bite problem. It'll happen.
Hmm.
And there's some things I've come to terms with. Not everybody cares. There's a lot of people that buy a dog that's, first of all, it has no, unless it's something severe, it doesn't have an impact on the dog's health. And if they're not interested in breeding their dog, then it's not a big deal.
Sure.
But there are people who, like, look, I really wanted to breed this dog. Then I'm gonna, work out something with them to compensate them for, this defect that they didn't really want.
Well, and that's the thing that I think a lot of folks miss. You being the difference in a breeder and a responsible breeder. Okay, so we've talked about a couple
Mhm.
times. You have you don't have 100% control over everything that happens. You have projections, you have expectations, you do have experience, typically past history of some sort with what you're doing. But
Mhm.
then there are anomalies. There are things that happen, and the differences that separate somebody that's just making puppies and respectable breeders. They're always going to stand behind what happens there to some. I mean, to some extent, to some degree. Those are the folks that you want to be working for. If you're looking for dogs and you're just interested in this conversation, and if you are planning on breeding dogs, I mean, you should fall into that category of
Mhm.
being able to be gotten a hold of, right? People should be able to hear. Because me personally, I want to know how the dogs are doing. We get some of them back in for training. We try and do a good job of placing them in situations that seem like good families that are willing to not necessarily test and title and go the distance, but are going to provide the dogs with a quality home. And usually to some extent that I have the opportunity to see, evaluate, that helps us to grow and to continue to
Mhm.
move forward. So, but if those, heaven forbid, those bad things happen or something off happens, right? Um,
Mhm.
just like you said, being able to stand behind what you're doing. So,
Yep, exactly.
do you
And I
have any
think
other
that's
examples with the dogs? I know you gave me a handful of different things. Was there somebody else that you wanted me to pull up here, Fred?
well, let's just circle back to, we started this conversation off talking, this is about line breeding, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what's the advantages of it? And of course, I'm a big proponent. And um, I sometimes so I sell dogs to people who there's an interest and they want to breed dogs someday, maybe. And I'm open to talking to people about that. It's like I'm not going to try to discourage someone from doing that. That's something they have to learn. It's not an easy game to play. And so to me, it's like I don't have to worry about discouraging someone from doing it. The process itself, if you don't have a passion inside of you that is pretty strong, you're not gonna go very far down the road, and you're gonna quit. Okay, but if
Sure.
you're interested in it, and let's say it's somebody's gotten a dog from me, they want to work with me, and I'm willing to do that. I love it because I don't want to have a whole. This is not my full time job. I have a career. This is a passion. So I work with people, and here's where I'm going. Is like sometimes the people ask me, "Hey Fred, what do you think about this breeding? You think this is too close?" And I'm kind of okay.
Just like I do.
Apparently you haven't gotten the memo. Fred doesn't believe in anything being too close. And I say that with a smile on my face because I know there's people that think, "Oh gosh, man, you're crazy." Let's go back to the Ariel von Hegehaus pedigree that you showed
Hmm.
a while ago. And just to give people an example, because I was looking at it. I mean, there's so many examples we can look at. But look here at his great great grandparent. Is that Ariel?
Yep.
Okay, so look at his grandparents. It's Raw Rife, Raw Rife, Raw Rife, and then go down here to Blanc. I mean, three of his grandfather. I'm sorry, at the column there. Is that his great grandparents? Great
Here.
grandparents. I'm sorry. Three of his great grandsires are Raw Rife. And the
Hmm.
fourth one is a son of Raw Rife. Okay. Now, if you didn't study that pedigree a little bit, you'd be like, oh well, that's that wouldn't frighten someone. You'd go, oh well, I can breed to that dog to that dog. That's not too tight. Oh wait a minute, look back there a little ways. There's like this is half brother, half sister, half brother to niece, you know, and I go, look at that, and then let's go look at Helfer. If you click on Helfer von Hegehaus, look at his pedigree. If people want to start talking about what's too close, Helfer is out of Elk.
40% here. 39.25.
Helfer is out of Elk and Unda. Oh, wow. Elk is out of Unda. Uh,
Yeah.
he's bred back to his mother. Okay, and okay, so wow. I mean, first of all, people, they kind of get a funny look on their faces, like, oh wow, son to mother. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Okay, well, nope, because we're talking about dogs, and if you look at the dog that Helfer was, it's if you could breed and produce that kind of dog every time, you'd be happy to do it. And I'm just using that as kind of an example, maybe maybe it's time to kind of wrap it up a little bit. I got to get back to my real job for a little while. And I have enjoyed doing this, Ethan. It's been fun. We've been. I mean, for me, I know I'm kind of all over the board. I get that way. I don't mean to be, but I think this is an interesting topic to discuss. And it's like what I can't come down on it and say, oh, I'm right, because I know there's other people out there that are successful and have done a lot of things, and they're not certainly not line breeding real tight. This is what I've chosen to do, and so far, I'm happy in the world I'm in and the dogs I'm producing, and I see other people doing stuff, and I'm like, all right. For me, I'd be like, if I was giving advice to somebody that wanted to get into breeding dogs, I'd say, you ought to get you dogs from this line and that line, and you start. This is a different flavor of cake. You're making a different cake than I made. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, absolutely.
maybe you'll do something really awesome. So that's kind of where I would land this plane right now, and for the time being anyway, stop the discussion and carry on someday, unless you had something else to ask me about.
No, no, absolutely. I like it, Fred. I really appreciate the time. And a couple of things that were mentioned that I just want to touch on for people. The books, I will try and throw links in the descriptions and stuff like that so you can find the German Shorthair book. If you're interested in breeding German Shorthair or just own them, it's an awesome book to read through. There's a ton
Mhm.
of history, a ton of information in there. The other, Snakefoot by Bob
Whaley,
Welly or
Whaley, Whaley.
Whaley. Yep.
Yep.
So another very interesting read about breeding, line breeding specifically, and how he was able to produce what is still a very, very, very strong name in the pointer world. And then outside of that, it comes down to, it just comes down to, I think, being honest about what you have and what your goals are.
Hmm.
And if you can do that, I think you'll be successful. Fred, how can people reach out to you specifically? I know you've mentioned you've got another job and whatever else, but how can people reach out to you, or would you like people to reach out to you? That would be
Oh,
the other
sure.
question.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm on Facebook. Like my granddaughter says, Facebook is for old people. Well, I'm old people, so that's the world I live on. I enjoy it. Facebook, Sundance, GSPs. Of course, message me on Messenger. I have a website, Sundance GSPs. You can send me an email from there if you'd like to. My email address is on there. It's just my name, 321 at gmail.com. You can also call me. I've helped people. I would say this, I've helped a lot of people. I'm not afraid to help people. Somebody will call me up. I mean, there's probably two or three people there's a guy out in Colorado, I think, got a dog from you. And he got a dog from somebody else. And he's like, hey, Fred, could you talk to me about pedigrees? Could you put a pedigree? I put a lot of pedigrees together for people. Okay. I don't
Hmm.
mind doing that. It's a lot of work if you're starting from scratch. I've shared my
Yes.
database with people. I'm sure you've got, who knows how many thousand dogs you've got in yours, but I've got whatever 10,000 dogs in mine. But yeah, anybody wants to reach out, talk about this stuff, I'm more than happy to talk to them.
That's awesome. Well, again, Fred, I really appreciate your time and the conversation today. I enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think everybody else will as well. Um, Moving forward, everybody, don't hesitate to reach out to Fred, as well as you know where you can find us. This will be available, and it's going to be very important to probably go and watch to fully grasp everything that we talked about here. To go to Standing Stone Podcasts, where this will air with the pedigree examples in there. If you are just listening, You can find us anywhere. There's the pods are caught. Podcast catchers. The pods are caught. All right, everybody. I'm the guy with the pink gun, and at that note, we will sign off here. Thank y'all.
All right, thank you, Ethan.